Committee will be in order, and thank you very much for joining us again at the Rules Committee. The gentlewoman from New York and I were just saying, since we were together last night at about 11 o'clock, here we are, we find ourselves here again.
We have the most fun.
We really do. And as I said, same bat time, same bat channel, and here we go. Louise, thank you very much. I appreciate you and your team coming back today. I think our team is assembled and ready today. I want to thank everybody for being here this afternoon. Today, the committee has the opportunity to consider two important pieces of legislation. First, the committee will consider H.R. 2218, the Coal Residuals Reuse and Management Act of 2013. This legislation safely and effectively allows for the proper reuse of coal combustible residue, otherwise known as coal ash. This byproduct of electricity production has many useful uses as components in several manufacturing processes. By using coal ash instead of new raw materials, companies are able to preserve our valuable domestic resources and reuse coal ash in many innovative and cost-effective ways. Today, more than 43% of all coal ash is reused or recycled in some fashion. This is called conservationism. This legislation today will promote further reuse, and I would like to thank Congressman David McKinley, who I spent the weekend with at the Boy Scout Jamboree in West Virginia, his home state. I want to thank him for his hard work and for presenting this legislation. In addition, the committee will consider H.R. 1582, the Energy Consumers Relief Act of 2013. This legislation is simple. It requires the EPA to submit a report to Congress for any new regulation that the EPA attempts to promulgate if that regulation will cost in excess of $1 billion. It also directs the Secretary of Energy to prevent the regulation from taking effect if independent analysis shows that it will have a negative impact on our economy. I would assume that means jobs also. This bill will create transparency in the EPA's rulemaking process and prevent the federal government from inflicting unnecessary harm to our economy through burdensome regulations. I also want to thank the gentleman from Louisiana, Congressman Bill Cassidy, for his dedication to transparency and working to bring this common sense legislation to the floor. I see four very distinguished gentlemen who have decided that they would come to the Rules Committee today representing the Energy and Commerce Committee, and I welcome them from two separate subcommittees. First, I would like to welcome on Committee on Energy and Commerce the gentleman from Illinois, gentleman, Mr. Shimkus, if he would please take a seat chair at the table. You may want to add two more chairs if you can, please, John, and I'm sure our clerk will help you do that. And Paul Tonko from New York, the ranking member of that subcommittee. And secondly, the Energy and Commerce the Energy and Commerce Committee with Ed Whitfield, who is the subcommittee chair on energy and power, and the gentleman, my dear friend from Illinois, Bobby Rush. So if you four, and I see three of the four here at this time, if three of the four of you will come up, we're going to have you testify on both of these bills at the same time. Bobby, I'm delighted that you're here. Good to see you. And as always, this committee shows up virtually as a full deck because we admire you, the people who are doing great work in committees, to come and update us on important issues. I find being on the Rules Committee, we have a chance to hear not just interesting oral arguments, but I learn a lot every time that you're here. And obviously, without objection, anything you have in writing will be entered into the record. And I'd like to, if I can, to defer to my awesome ranking member, the gentlewoman from New York, for any statement that she'd choose to make. Gentlewoman is recognized.
No statement.
No statement. Well, Bobby, if it helps you, that Louise told me that she was delighted that you were here earlier. So that she may have gotten past that point now.
No, I'm tickled death to see him. Ed's from Kentucky, and my buddy Jimkus and I have known each other for years. Thank you all for
Home state. Home state product over there, Louise.
Yeah, absolutely. Once Kentucky and always.
Yeah. So we're delighted that you're here today, and without objection, I'd like to have the gentleman from Illinois, the gentleman, Mr. Shimkus, the subcommittee chairman, is recognized. If you'll please make sure that microphone's on. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's great to be here. I don't get a chance to visit you all that much, so I would like to get this submitted for the full record because I don't really want to read it, but I just want to talk about what we've done. A bill like this was similarly passed in the last Congress. The basic intent of this legislation is that there's really no rules right now for coal ash, fly ash impoundments. And so after the tragedy about 5 years ago, Kingston, Tennessee, where you had the liquid coal ash pond that the levees broke, there's been a move to try to address these concerns. And there's always been a concern that some movement on many of on our sides that it would be labeled under Subtitle C of the law, which would make it a toxic waste, and then you have a lot of problems, and I'll talk about those real quickly. EPA has always been on record twice saying that fly ash is not a toxic waste, and that's why fly ash is used in the recycling industry. 30% of all fly ash is recycled. It either goes into cement, it goes into shingles, it goes into asphalt. So the concern has always been if you label it as toxic, then school buildings that have fly ash as part of their concrete would then you would have toxic residue inside concrete that then would have to be disposed of in toxic waste dumps, which is really cost prohibitive. So we tried to go about this. The EPA has been in litigation on this also. And so what we did under this piece of legislation was we structured it very similar to the Municipal Solid Waste Act, which is all states and municipalities apply now. We have federal standards, state enforcement, state certification, and state implementation of the coal ash confinements. They will then be lined. They'll be almost like treated like a municipal waste solid dump, where they'll be lined, they'll be inspected for groundwater, but you'll still have the protection that much of this could then be used in the recycling aspects in the industry, which is good for everybody, because if you can't recycle it, then it's going to go into municipal waste dumps anyway. So this helps us make sure that we only put stuff in that we definitely can't use. It supports the recycling aspect, and it clarifies and adjusts the Subtitle C, which is a toxic, and puts it into Subtitle D, which is not, and which is really in compliance with the EPA. This legislation has changed quite a bit since last Congress. All very good, more restrictive. We've had great discussions with the EPA. Of course, they're not going to endorse the bill, but in testimony they said they weren't opposed. So I think with that I can end my opening statement. You'll have my full statement for the record, and I'll take any questions at your pleasure, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. And your ranking member of your subcommittee has not yet arrived. As soon as he walks in, we will slot him in to sit at the table as we would welcome him as a partner with you. And at this time, I'd like to go then to the gentleman, Mr. Whitfield, and then to the gentleman, my dear friend, Mr. Rush. The gentleman from Kentucky is recognized.
Well, Chairman Sessions, thank you very much, and Ranking Member Slaughter and all of you members of the Rules Committee. We appreciate the opportunity to be here, and I specifically to discuss H.R. 1582. As many of you know, the last 15 quarters of economic growth in America has been at its lowest level since World War II. GDP has been exceeding just barely 2%. And in June, we actually lost 243,000 permanent jobs in America, full-time permanent jobs in America. This legislation, which was drafted by Dr. Cassidy, basically says, because of the economic impact that regulations can have, that if EPA before they finalize an energy-related rule estimated by the agency or OMB to cost more than $1 billion. And it's easy to cost more than $1 billion, but before they do, they must simply submit to Congress an estimate of the cost and the benefits of the rule, an estimate of the increases in energy prices, and a detailed description of the job impacts. So EPA would submit that report to Congress before finalizing the rule. In addition, the Secretary of Energy, working with the Small Business Administrator, the Secretary of Labor, and the Secretary of Commerce would look at the impact of that rule on consumer prices, on energy cost, on job loss, and the impact on unemployment. And if the Secretary of Energy, who right now, as you know, is Mr. Moniz, if he, working with those other cabinet secretaries, felt that this particular rule would have a significant adverse effect on the economy, they could prevent the rule from taking effect. So it's really a simple piece of legislation. It basically provides some transparency. EPA has been extraordinarily aggressive, and they do a good job over there. But because of the current situation of our economy, struggling, sluggish, inability to create jobs, this legislation simply gives a second look at a regulation that before it goes into effect, we need to know what will be the impact. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I would yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you very much, Mr. Whitfield. I do want to come back to you with some of your comments about the economy, but I'm delighted to hear the conversation you've got, Mr. Tonko. We're delighted that you're here. I'm going to go ahead and go defer, if I can, now to the gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Rush.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and the Madam Ranking Member for this opportunity to speak before the Rules Committee on this bill. Mr. Chairman, this bill has been misnamed. This bill is called the Energy Consumer Relief Act, but a more appropriate title would be the Blocking Public Health Shamelessly Act. This bill supported shamelessly contend that this legislation simply provides for more transparency and checks and balances on the EPA. However, don't be deluded, make no mistake about it. This bill is about making government, it's not about making government more open, more accountable to the American people. In fact, this bill is shamelessly about blocking the EPA from finalizing rules that will make our air and our water cleaner and helping to avert catastrophic climate change. Mr. Chairman, this bill has many difficulties, many flaws, many frailties. But the one overriding issue, problem with this bill is that it gives the Department of Energy an unprecedented veto over the most important EPA rules to protect human health and our nation's environment. The bill shamelessly prevents the EPA from finalizing critical EPA regulations while DOE conducts an analysis of adverse impacts of the renewable energy supply, use prices, and other factors. The Energy Secretary then must single-handedly and all by himself, determine if the EPA rule will cause a significant adverse impact to the economy. This bill provides no deadline for completing the analysis and no deadline for making the determination, which means the EPA rule will be indefinitely delayed even if the Secretary of Energy never exercises his veto authority. However, if the Secretary determines that the regulation will cause a significant adverse economic impact, then the EPA rule is permanently blocked, giving DOE unprecedented veto power. Numerous environmental statutes require EPA to issue regulations to reduce pollution affecting our air, our land, and our water. And for each major rule, Mr. Chairman, members of this committee, the EPA goes through a rigorous and transparent regulatory process, the same process that is used by all other federal agencies. And this process can involve months or even years of public comment, stakeholder engagement, and interagency review. The EPA regulations most likely to be delayed or blocked by this legislation have tremendous benefits for human health and the environment, including money saved on energy bills and at the gas pump, reductions in emissions of toxic pollutants that cause cancer, and delays developmental progress in our children. Hospitalizations that will be averted, prevention of asthma attacks, prevention of premature death, all of which provide real benefits to your constituents, to my constituents, to our nation. Those are real people we're talking about in real conditions. Mr. Chairman, this bill has, as I indicated earlier, many other problems as well. It requires DOE to conduct a duplicative and unnecessary analysis at the same time that the agency's budget is being woefully slashed. The legislation also allows DOE to conduct this analysis and make its economic impact determination behind closed doors, while experts and scientists and the public have no opportunity to comment on DOE's analysis of the rule's impact. So, Mr. Chairman, I urge this August committee, the Rules Committee, to make as many democratic amendments in order as possible to address the fundamental flaws in this bill. I also urge the committee to make my amendment in order, which simply states that the bill does not apply to EPA rules that save consumers dollars, money at the gas pump. The title of this bill is the Consumer Relief Act, so therefore, I can see no logical reason why this bill's supporters would want to shamelessly block or delay EPA rules that actually lower energy costs for consumers. Mr. Chairman, I appeal to this committee on both sides of the aisle. I simply state, Mr. Chairman, that there must be some shame in our game. Thank you, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Mr. Rice, thank you very much, not only for your testimony, but for showing up here to ensure that we have heard your best thoughts on this issue and the ideas and your expertise and experience in this Congress. We appreciate it. We think we benefit when we get senior members of both parties and others to come and lend their expertise, and I appreciate you being here today.
Thank you,
Mr. Tonko, you probably didn't know this, but we're delighted that you're here today. And both Mrs. Slaughter and I are very open to the testimony that which you will give us today. We're speaking about H.R. 2218, the Coal Residual Reuse and Management Act of 2013, which you are most familiar with. And the gentleman, Mr. Shimkus, the chairman of the subcommittee, has already given testimony. And we agreed as quickly as you got here that we'd get to you, we would. Without objection, anything you have in writing, if you wish to enter the record, it'll be accepted. And we welcome your testimony. The gentleman is now recognized.
Thank you. Chairman Sessions, Ranking Member Slaughter, and members of the committee, I'm here this afternoon to testify on H.R. 2218, the Coal Ash Residual Reuse and Management Act of 2013, and to ask this committee to grant an open rule for consideration of this bill. If an open rule is not granted, then I would ask the committee to grant floor consideration to the amendments filed by Democratic members earlier today. The House considered legislation on coal ash disposal several times in the last Congress, although none of the proposals became law. In its present form, H.R. 2218 is likely to follow a similar path. The uncertainty that is facing the coal ash recycling industry, the utilities, and the many communities located near these disposal facilities will continue. We could, however, have a different outcome. Coal ash is one of our nation's largest waste streams. Fortunately, some of these residuals can be put to productive use when encapsulated in products such as cement and drywall. However, not all materials can be recycled. The coal ash that is destined for disposal must be handled safely. If we apply sound engineering principles and existing technologies in use today to handle this waste, we can solve the groundwater contamination, the air pollution, and structural integrity problems that exist in many older coal ash disposal facilities. And we can ensure that new facilities are constructed to handle this waste in a safe manner. H.R. 2218 does not achieve these goals. It asks too little of the states and the facilities operators, and it prevents the EPA from acting when the states fail to do so. This bill will not prevent the type of catastrophic spill that was experienced by residents of Tennessee in 2008, when deficient coal ash disposal facilities failed and contaminants spread into waterways and across the land in Kingston. It does not address the questionable status of old facilities like the one in Wisconsin that send a mixture of soil, mud, machinery, and coal ash into Lake Michigan when a bluff on the edge of an old disposal area collapsed. The cleanup process, still underway in Tennessee, will cost over $1 billion before it is complete. This is the type of spending we can, and we should, and we must avoid. There is no reason to put communities at risk. We continue to use coal to generate a significant amount of our electricity. We will continue to generate coal combustion wastes. We must handle them safely. I submitted an amendment for the committee's consideration to address one of the significant problems with this bill, the lack of authority for EPA to step in when one state's actions directly impact resources shared by neighboring states. My amendment simply clarifies that the federal government has an interest in protecting all citizens, no matter where in the nation they reside. It would enable a state that believed the permit program of a neighboring state was deficient to request a review of the allegedly deficient program by EPA. It would also allow EPA to ensure that all states' permit programs were sufficient to ensure that facilities located near important shared resources or the borders with neighboring states offered sufficient protection. My colleagues have submitted equally constructive amendments that are worthy of consideration by the full membership of this House. Again, I ask that all members of the House have an opportunity to offer amendments to this legislation. An open rule would ensure this best. In the absence of granting a full open rule, I respectfully request that amendments submitted to the Rules Committee this morning be made in order. With that, I thank you, Chair Sessions, Ranking Member Slaughter, and members of this committee for your kind attention and consideration to this matter.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the testimony from all four of you today. And Mr. Shimkus, I'd like to ask you, what is being done today in relationship to this coal ash and its storage and use?
It's really, there's no federal guidelines implemented as is stored by state rules and state regulations right now. And that's really one of the compelling reasons why we wanted to obviously move in a direction to have federal standards. But the difference is, instead of the EPA doing the enforcement, very much like RCRA, I would say municipal solid waste, you have the federal standards, the state implement it.
Yeah. So it's really the states have this responsibility today. The states are looking after it, and you would choose to still allow them to have that responsibility.
But the difference is, Chairman, if I may, is just that we're going to have federal standards. So, I mean, this is...
But you have four standards.
Right. The bill, this is actually a bill that passed the floor of the House with a bipartisan majority last Congress. This is even a more restrictive bill, this time with input from the EPA, and actually through in the hearing process, we added some provisions like the groundwater monitoring and the liner issue and the like. So we think we've made great strides to move in a direction that for future landfills or municipal waste, like municipal waste solid landfills, this will have in essence the same liner, same ground monitoring aspects of this, so it's a step in the right direction.
I think it's also easier, up to and including the addition of the EPA and their feedback. I think the advantage that I would see that you've gotten, the wisdom behind the bill is once you set a standard, then if you have a problem, you know, if you change a standard, and everybody can then work off that if there is a problem instead of starting with different places where everybody was. So I definitely see that advantage, and I think that's important. I think the safety aspect overwhelms states if they have different characteristics for same types of procedures. So I support that. Mr. Whitfield, your testimony here obviously is compelling to me. I'm concerned about jobs in this country. I'm concerned about our GDP. I'm concerned about 243,000 permanent jobs being lost. You can look at the statistics and the numbers, and as of a few months ago, we had the same number of jobs in this country now that we did the year I graduated from college. And that's disturbing to me. I find the federal government rules and regulations are getting in the way. Before I walked in this meeting, I was in a meeting with some people who were talking about the natural gas industry and how they have to go through 40 different permitting processes with the federal government. And they're sequential with each other, which means one starts and finishes, and they were talking about one first step taking with the EPA taking 700 days. My golly, we'll never get things done. Time is money in this country. I want to thank you for trying to work on this issue. What do you think can be the net result of this? We can save jobs or save money, or what are we really going to do from this?
Well, I do genuinely believe that it brings more transparency to the system. As you know, EPA is in existence because of Congress. We pass laws. They issue the rules and regulations, interpret those laws. And because of our dire economic situation today, all we're asking is that before they finalize a rule, that they give us a copy of the rule, give us an analysis of the cost benefits of the rule, and then we have the Secretary of Energy working with Small Business Administrator, Department of Labor, and Secretary of Commerce, as well as FERC and the Energy Information Agency, to determine, will this have a significant adverse impact on jobs, on consumer prices related to energy, and if so, then the option would be that this rule not go into effect, and EPA could go back and change that rule. So it just gives a second bite at the apple at a time when the country is trying to create jobs and stimulate the economy.
Well, I happen to be one that I am, being from Dallas, Texas, of an economic mind. I try and look for people who will be entrepreneurs, people who will be investors, people who will be educated, R&D, all the way to doing the job. And I find that protecting jobs, especially in middle America and sometimes rural areas, which is, I think, a lot of what we're talking about, is very important. I've come back from West Virginia this past weekend, and I heard story after story of poverty, of people who live in the area who are losing their jobs, losing their livelihood, losing their pensions because of President Obama's rules and regulations. The war on coal is what they call it, and it has had a devastating impact about people who have spent years. I'm very proud of the work that they do and the attributes that God has given those regions of the country. And so I'm delighted that you're bringing this up and somehow believe there must be not only a balance but some opportunity for us to understand that the protection of jobs should be well understood, that if we're going to sacrifice jobs, we better find something better to do, and I'm delighted with the legislation you brought today. Thank you very much, all four of you.
Mr. Chair?
Gentleman seeks recognition.
Thank you. If I might, I think that this is one of the most critical waste streams that is part of our country's industrialization. And there are ways to learn from this whole process. And when you look at the situation in Tennessee, when you look at the situation in Michigan, you know, the mistakes there and the irresponsibility cost us dearly. And I think when we're going into some of these dangerous precedents that could be established, we're playing with fire here. And I only ask that we modify some of these approaches. That's why the request for the amendments. Look, we're all about creating jobs.
We are?
I believe we are. It's just that we don't want to put some situations in play that are going to drain us of the opportunity to provide jobs when you're getting impacted with bills that exceed $1 billion. And I think the effort here is to be balanced in the approach, to be not playing games with agencies where we can break down their authority or their responsibility. Some of this delay that might be a result of this all could cost us dearly, could drag out the process. And we're just asking that, for example, in the case of multiple states that might be impacted by some of these decisions, that there be fairness here for everybody. And I think we can go forward and create jobs in a more just and fair outcome.
Well, Mr. Tonko, I think jobs and the requirement that an agency be responsible for telling you the full impact, including jobs, is fair. And I will tell you, you talk about some of the amendments that you'd be in favor of. In this particular case, Mr. Shimkus gave testimony that said that the EPA provided feedback and could be considered that they provided feedback and is not necessarily opposed to the bill. Notwithstanding, we'll find out when the President of the United States gets a chance to sign this. But I think these are very well-balanced bills, and as a matter of fact, this committee will undertake that process to look at the amendments and see what we think is a good balance also. That's why you've got stellar members on this committee who are able to sift through this legislation and see. So I appreciate you being here, and your testimony is important for us to remember that balance is something we have a responsibility to hear from you about, and I thank you for your words. Joe Long from North Carolina is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I thank our colleagues for being here. If I have no questions, I yield back.
Thank you very much. Gentlewoman, the ranking member of the committee is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and gentlemen. First, I want to talk about the EPA, whether they accept the bill or not. I think they're not permitted to make that decision, that only the administration can decide whether they're going to support a bill or not. Isn't that true?
That's true. I mean, we've been in negotiations with them. That's why I was cautious to say they haven't endorsed it. But they're in litigation.
They can't endorse it. They can't endorse it.
Well, unless the administration says they support the bill, so.
And I do have the administration policy here, which I'll paraphrase. On 2218, they were concerned about a number of things. They didn't talk about veto, but that they would like to work with the committee. The $1.2 billion to clean up Kingston, Tennessee was tax money, as I understand it. It's public money. No coal company paid for any of that. Isn't that correct? And it's still being done.
It's still being
It's
I can't speak to
it is
who
public money.
did the remediation.
I know it is. So they had some suggestions here, and I'd like unanimous consent to put this.
That objection.
And also the statement on administrative policy, where they say that should that pass, and they hope it won't, they would veto it, because it would create unnecessary litigation, inhibit the EPA from their decision-making, and planning efforts would delay uncertainty, or delay and create uncertainty for regulated businesses. And my one concern, too, about the disposal of Tennessee was that what they're doing is packing it all up and putting in a dump in Alabama, and all the people who live around there are getting pretty sick from it because it's dangerous. Coal ash is very dangerous. It has cadmium, lead, mercury, hexavalent chromium, and arsenic. And I think, Mr. Tonko, you mentioned that some of those things might be reclaimed for use rather than landfill. Is that,
Sure.
Did I hear you correctly?
Yes.
And
So, yeah, there are those byproducts that can be part of the cycle.
which would create some jobs and help the economy. Right. So I would, I know this bill's passed the House 4 times, and they hadn't even had a hearing over in the Senate. It would give us time for us to really work on something where we could talk about reclaiming those minerals. And certainly, I don't know that the taxpayer should always be on the hook for these things that will be happening. But how long has it been? Because Kingston was enveloped in ash about 3 years, and they're still not through.
I think it was 2008. It was the Tennessee Valley Authority, which is a
Right.
public entity.
Right.
But they paid for the cleanup. It was TVA's responsibility.
Well, I think it was.
TVA is a public power entity, so out of their revenues, they paid for the cleanup.
Well, I just I'd love to help you work on this because I think it's important, but I don't think these bills do it. As the way I understand them, they simply take EPA out of it altogether, although they have the overall obligation to really protect the water and the air for all citizens of the United States. And they can't do that if you take this out of this very important piece. So thank you for your testimony. I wish I could support this, but I can't. But thank you anyway.
A gentlewoman yields back time. Gentleman from Utah is recognized. No question. Gentleman from Massachusetts.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to associate myself with the words of our ranking member expressing my concern over these bills. But I just want to take this one moment. The chairman brought up the issue of jobs, and when you look at what Congress has done in terms of job creation, at least this Congress, it's not a very impressive record at all. And when you look at the impacts of sequestration, which this Congress voted for, the majority here voted for, we're losing millions of jobs. I mean, there are people who either Head Start programs that are being shut down all around the country. You've got people being furloughed. I read a statistic that over 700 research programs that NIH wanted to go forward with to try to find cures to everything from Alzheimer's to Parkinson's disease, and by the way, would ultimately save us a lot of money. Those are all on hold or have been canceled because of sequestration. And I would just say, with all due respect to everyone being here today, that our time would be better spent right now if the Republican leadership would go to conference with the Senate and work out a budget resolution. And if we could come to some sort of agreement amongst ourselves, the House and Senate, on alternative numbers to sequestration, that would do a heck of a lot more for our economy than anything else. And this notion that somehow we're waiting for President Obama to walk in and sit down in a back room alone with Republicans to work things out, that's not the way this process is supposed to work. We pass a budget, Senate passes a budget, we're supposed to work out the differences, then you go to the President. And I just, with respect, I would urge you, to urge your leadership to get serious about this, because everywhere I go in my district, people are losing their jobs or being furloughed because of the action and now the inaction of this House of Representatives, of this Congress. And I think if we're truly interested in jobs, we will address those issues sooner rather than later. But I thank you for being here, and yeah, I'm happy to yield to the gentleman.
For your comments, and I want to speak to this issue of jobs also, because my district is probably one of the most concentrated poverty districts in the nation. And I have 80% of my young people are unemployed. 42% of adult males in my district unemployed. It's one thing to have jobs when you're unemployed on your mind. It's far different to have unemployed in your heart. And we can speak sound bites and give some empty gestures toward jobs, but it's high time in this Congress, in a bipartisan way, really start doing the things that will create jobs for the American people, because we are languishing. I have multi-intergenerational joblessness in my district. I have more people who are underemployed than unemployed in my district. So I don't take the issue of jobs lightly. I think that there is rationale behind the amendments on this bill, sound reasoning behind amendments on this bill. I don't think that anyone in this room can contend with me that during the tenure of the EPA, that there wasn't jobs that were created under the auspices of the EPA or the regulatory regime of the EPA. And the EPA is a convenient battering ram for those who are anti-Obama, who complains that he will never, ever have a successful presidency, or that his legacy will always be one of non-selection. But look at the results. Obama is being accused as being a do-nothing president, but this Republican in Congress is a line in history as being the most do-nothing Congress in the history of our great nation. Now, that's not a badge of honor. That's a badge of dishonor. And so I think that we ought to, as the gentleman from Mr. Levin said, I think we ought to be serious about jobs. But again, Mr. Chairman, I said the job on the mind, in the mind, on the mind is not the same thing as jobs in the heart. And we ought to put our heart where our mouth is and work on creating jobs for all of the American people, those who are in West Virginia, West Los Angeles, and on the west side of the city of Chicago. That's what we ought to do.
I thank the gentleman for his comments, and I think he's exactly right. And I would also add that one of the other problems that we have is not only underemployment, but when people who are working full-time who earn so little that they still qualify for public assistance. We had a debate a couple of weeks ago on the Farm Bill where people on food stamps, now the SNAP program, were assailed, we ought to get a job. Millions and millions and millions and millions of these people are working full-time, and they still earn so little they qualify for that assistance. So maybe we ought to be talking about raising the minimum wage as well. But, I mean, there are lots of things we can do. But I just say one thing, and I agree. Look, there are regulations that we need to look at and that we need to adjust. And we need to make sure that our regulatory system is not unfair. But I'm going to tell you right now, the roads that aren't being fixed and the bridges that aren't being repaired right now have nothing to do with regulation. They have everything to do with Washington walking away from their investment in our infrastructure. And so, let's go to conference on the budget. Let's fix sequestration. You'll see a lot more people get back to work. I thank the gentleman. I yield back my time.
This time I want to thank gentlemen, and I appreciate the conversations being had. I obviously recognize we're talking past each other again. We've gotten very good at this, not just in this committee. We've done this for years. Mr. Rush knows he comes up here and tries to give the very best testimony he can. What I would say to the gentleman back is there are ways to create jobs. It is not a difficult thing. If you look back at the models of success of President Bill Clinton, he cut taxes. He made investment happen in this country, and it happened. If you don't follow that model, you get also reverse. When you raise taxes, more rules and regulations, and do the things where you place restrictions on business, you will get what you said you weren't going to get, and that is unemployed people. And that is why President Obama's economic problems come from his philosophy of raising taxes, more rules and regulations. So all I can tell you is, if Mr. Rush, anytime you want to come join us, I'll show you the model of success as a businessman. A business person wants to grow the number of people that they have that work for them and pay them more money. That is a success model of a business leader, and we all recognize that President Bill Clinton understood that, and that's why he was willing to grow the economy.
If I might, with all due respect to you, I was elected in '92. I came here in Bill Clinton's first term, and I was among the Democrats who fought vigorously for the policies and programs of Bill Clinton. And I know what Bill Clinton did, and how he did it, how jobs were created during his presidency. And he did it notwithstanding the opposition of Newt Gingrich and the Republican Party. He did it in spite of it with the support of Democrats. The Democrats' model for creating jobs is not a model where they try to dismantle government and try to use some flimsy excuse that if, in fact, we eliminate or remove the authority of the EPA, then all of a sudden that's going to open up the wall screens and all these jobs where they've been created.
Yes, sir.
Bill Clinton's, Mr. Chairman, I might remind you that during Bill Clinton's presidency, the EPA rose to stellar heights. They set new standards. Carol Brown was recognized from here to there, all over the world. All over nations all over the world, Europe and other places, they look toward the U.S., the Environmental Protection Agency as being a model for how to deal with the environment, climate change, and how to also create a vigorous and robust economy. So I don't know which Bill Clinton you're talking about, Mr. Chairman, but I know which one I work with day by day, hour by hour, both before he was elected, while he was president, and still today work with him very, very closely.
Well, I'm in reference to the born-again Bill Clinton, who worked with a Republican majority because he got it because of his liberal policies. But I would say this, that I think the EPA was a good model, and that's why you saw legislation turned down in the United States Senate 99-0 against the United Nations policies that they were trying to push. So I think it's all It's all trying to, I just tell you, the way you get jobs is you cut taxes and you make it better. And if anytime you want to join us, be glad to have you there. I'd like to yield to the gentleman from Florida at this time.
I don't know that I have a whole lot to add to it, other than the fact that in my community, my home community, the unemployment rate is now 8.6%. And one of the manufacturers that we don't have many, but one that we do have is cement. And coal ash is a huge, huge driver in regards to the ability for them to produce cement. While it only creates 200 jobs, not huge, but to an economy like ours, when you have 8.6% unemployment, that's huge. And so I want to make sure that we do everything, to keep our air and water safe, but also want to do things that we continue to keep people working. This isn't even about adding jobs. It's about keeping 200 people that are currently working, to keep them in a position that they can provide for their families. And so I just bring that as just something from back home. Yes, sir.
And I'll be brief. I mean, that's a perfect example why the bill was put forward, because fly ash is used in a lot of products that are purchased. Concrete that's been mixed in cement, and it does help in road construction because it lowers the cost of the road project. So it's, if we were to label fly ash as toxic, we would no longer mix it, which would then make our roads be more expensive. So there is a nexus here in infrastructure, and that's why the debate on moving it from Subtitle C to Subtitle D is critical in this, and not just in the cement, but also on the shingles or on sometimes you get these granite-looking countertops. Well, that's recycled fly ash that's been used and is now in people's homes as nice-looking type granite countertops. So that's really one of the emphasis of the legislation.
I guess one last thing is that, when I mentioned 200 jobs, that has nothing, that doesn't take into account all the folks that are truck drivers and others that are associated in the construction, road building, all those that it would have a direct impact on. So, Mr. Chairman, I appreciate this bill. Thank you.
Gentleman yields time. Gentleman from Florida is recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I have a request that's unrelated to any of the rules matters that we are dealing with today, and that is that the chair or all of us who are cold contact the architect of the Capitol and ask if he would have his engineers learn how we can regulate this room. I'm not talking about coal ash here. I'm talking about being plain cold. And somehow or another, we need to do something about this. I'm frozen out enough in the rules-making process that don't wind up being frozen out of the damn building.
If the gentleman would yield.
Yeah, Mr.
In fact, the gentlewoman, Mrs. Slaughter, has mentioned this to me before. I will today. Yes, ma'am, you have. And I do admit I laughed with you, not at you, about being cold. But I think it is something I need to look into, and I promise to do that today.
Thank you very much, Mr.
And I was not trying to ignore you. I heard it one day, and then other days I didn't. So I did not know. I appreciate it.
I'll continue to repeat it as long as
yes, sir.
the bill
I intend to get it looked
remains
into.
This way. Mr. Whitfield, let me ask you something. This bill applies to EPA rules that cost over $1 billion, I heard you say. But it doesn't say if that and correct me if I'm wrong, if that $1 billion is over 1 year, 10 years, 100 years, or 1,000 years. Does that seem to you to be the way we ought to go about legislating in complete vagueness as it pertains to the amount?
Well, when EPA issues a rule, they normally just put down the dollar cost over a period of time, and it's just that one figure that we work with. And while I didn't draft this legislation, It's my understanding that Mr. Cassidy said $1 billion as determined by EPA or OMB.
Well, pick a number, and I guess they'll pick a number as to whether it's 1 year or 10 years or 100 years. But let me go back to and echo the sentiments of the ranking member and Mr. McGovern, as well as Mr. Rush. I kind of have to wonder whether this legislation would give the EPA more power to ensure strong national standards that protect human health are enforced if these depositories were closer to more affluent communities. Perhaps it is that some of you have not had the experience that some of us have. I live in Fort Lauderdale, really Miramar, but lived in Fort Lauderdale when I moved there 50 years ago. Every incinerator, every dump, every treatment facility of human waste was in some portion of the black community in Fort Lauderdale. My law partner and I filed lawsuit after lawsuit with reference to them. One of them on Wingate Road, and this isn't coal ash. This is just plain, and I might add, let me compliment Florida Power and Light, who last week destroyed 2 of their coal ash facilities in Fort Lauderdale. They're to be complimented, in my judgment, for being forward-leaning. But at the very same time, you would have to know that it's awfully hurtful to find that in most of the communities where these Superfunds, in those days, brown fields, they were brown fields because there were brown people living close to them in addition to the hazardous waste that had been dumped into their communities. We've done study after study after study about the Wingate facility. And what we have learned is the incidence of cancer, particularly in women and men with prostate cancer, is higher in a 2 square mile radius around that facility than anywhere else in Broward County, Florida. Many of the people that died in the last 30 years because of that facility were dear, dear friends of mine. Many of them helped me start my career. And I find it strange that we come to this particular position that we're in with something that ain't going nowhere. And you all know it. You've done it 4 times already. The 5th is not going to be the charm with the United States Senate. Maybe if you win the United States Senate in 2014, the 6th might be the charm, but the harm that would come from it is where the problem is. And I can't believe that you all are that heartless, or that you don't recognize, and let me just follow on what Ms. Slaughter had to say. Not only is it true that 70% of coal ash impoundments are located in areas where household income is lower than the national median, it is also true as it pertains to the measure Mr. Tonko cited and all of us are mindful of. Even after the spill in Tennessee, all that coal ash sludge they cleaned up was disposed of within 100 feet of people's homes in a regular municipal waste landfill in Uniontown, Alabama, a town where about half of the residents are below the poverty level. That's just absurd. And you can't, look, I understand bumper sticker. I understand strategies, and Mr. Chairman, I recommend to you one of the dumbest things I've seen done around here is the way you've put forward, not you, Mr. Chairman, but your party. In roll call today, it cites to how you plan to go about the August recess. Wake up, America. Here it comes. Obama did it. Mr. Chairman, you need to understand something. This economy changed over a period of 60 years. It did not change overnight. I was here when Deng Xiaoping came here during Jimmy Carter's administration. And I was invited to the State Department where all these American business persons knew that China was getting ready to open up, and they were readying themselves to open it up. Now, we do ourselves a disservice even to other countries, and Mr. Rush is absolutely correct. People look to America for the EPA standards that we have managed to set. And that isn't just Barack Obama. That's other presidents before Barack Obama, including Lyndon Johnson 50 years ago. There's an ad that's running now that talks about how Lyndon Johnson 50 years ago said that we needed to have clean air. I lived in Los Angeles and woke up one morning and couldn't even open my eyes for the reason that the smog was so bad. I left my mother and father there. The following week, I told them I couldn't live in a community like that. I went to school in Nashville, Tennessee, and we had coal ash. Everybody burned coal in Nashville at that time. And I almost had to leave school because my lungs were filled with coal, and when I would blow my nose, it would come out black. Now, I don't know whether it will create any jobs. I don't know how many people we have to have suffer on a continuing basis, and I applaud my colleagues. I represent Florida. Argued vociferously against a recent proposal by Jesse Jackson about boycotting something. It won't help nothing in Florida with the backward legislature that we have. They got boycott till they're blue in the face. But the simple fact of the matter is, I respect my colleagues. I know you come from Kentucky. I know you come from Illinois. And I know that those are places that it's important to you to have this kind of legislation. But if it were to become the law, I find it more than ironic that the people who argue about bureaucracy the most, Republicans, are creating more bureaucracy. And I don't know how many of you all have communicated with other agencies, but just imagine how long it will take, and you're concerned about EPA now, imagine how long it will take for EPA and the Energy Department to coordinate their activities. I don't care what administration, what bureaucracy. We come and we go, legislators do, but bureaucracies are really, really, really embedded in our society. And it will be amazing to me that you all do this. Now, I'm going to have a lot more to say tomorrow that's going to be a lot nastier, and I promise you that. But it is not done with disrespect nor recognizing parochial interest. And that's what we are here about, and that's not necessarily what's the best thing for us to do in this nation. I'm going to tell you once again, Mr. Chairman, this economy didn't change because of Obamacare. That hadn't been implemented yet. This economy didn't change because Barack Obama became President of the United States of America. This economy changed because international businesses and mega corporations determined that the economy would be changed and that we would go about a new normal where we are today. We ain't going to create no jobs here in this place. And you're dead wrong about investment. I didn't finish my statement to you yesterday when you talked about people, because of regulation, not wanting to invest in America. And my colleague is dead wrong when you think that it is that corporations want to hire more people. Well, then why is it they aren't hiring more people? Is it because of regulation, or is it because they're making more money, because they're more efficient, because they're using technology? This technology is real. There's going to be a future, and we aren't going to be a part of that future. Many of us will long since have been dead, but if we don't start educating our children and doing the things necessary for the infrastructure in this country, and causing those business persons who hide their money overseas, who participate in activities in other countries that are creating super funds, I don't care whether it's a child in India that's dying, or a child in China, or a child in Africa. We're doing the same thing. I don't know how many of you have been to Nigeria, whether or not your Bobby and I were there, and if you were to just look at the Delta, it would scare you no end. I don't know how many of you have been to Germany and seen the Black Forest die because of the kinds of things that we are talking about. We owe a responsibility to this universe. We owe a responsibility to ourselves, and especially to our children and to the children of this entire earth. We can't continue down this path. So whoever is doing the rule tomorrow, you get ready, because I'm going to be pretty damn mad.
Mr. Chairman, may I make just a comment?
Gentleman is recognized.
Mr. Hastings, I appreciate your genuine concern, and we all know that you're very sensitive to the well-being of humanity. But on H.R. 1582, let me just comment that EPA has come forth with a lot of regulations. We've had a multitude of hearings. I mean, we've had 30, 40 hearings. And whenever we have a hearing with an EPA witness, and we're talking about, Mr. Shimkus and I are from states in which people had jobs and lost jobs directly because of regulation. And when EPA comes and we ask them, did you consider the impact on those people in that community, they say no. They consider the overall health benefits in a generic way from people around the country. But they do not, for example, look at the health costs to people who lose their job and they lose their health insurance in those communities. They do not look at it. And they do not look at the increased unemployment levels in those communities that suffer as a direct result of their regulations. So one of the philosophical thoughts behind this was that someone with the expertise should at least explore that. And then they would not necessarily have to say we're not going to implement this regulation, but at least that would be explored, because today EPA does not look at the impact on those communities that are hit by these regulations.
Mr. Whitfield,
yes.
I certainly understand your perspective. And I understand a little bit about Kentucky. I'm not as familiar with Kentucky generally. I had a roommate that practiced law in Louisville, and I regrettably went to visit him during the Kentucky Derby, and I didn't do good. But I don't quarrel with your perspective. I would disagree with you about the Rust Belt generally, and your comment that you and Mr. Shimkus, your states lost jobs because of regulation. Long before the kind of regulation that you're witnessing today that you quarrel about, long before that, in the industrial base of this country, in Ohio and in Illinois, and throughout that entire area, those jobs were gone because corporate entities made them leave. I asked a woman, I was with Newt Gingrich in Hong Kong, and I asked a woman that owned the corporation, Ann Taylor, the communities that she left. It didn't have anything to do with regulation. It had to do with cheaper wages in China. And I asked her, did you think about the size of your corporation, and did you think about leaving something behind? And they didn't. And that's what we experienced. Now, you may not have experienced the exact same thing in Kentucky, but I know a little bit about Illinois. And a whole lot of the businesses that left Illinois left way before they left during Bush's administration, they left during President Bush, administration, they left during Bill Clinton's administration, every one of them. And that's why you call it the Rust Belt. And then people didn't prepare as well as some. The little lady in Pittsburgh was a visionary, and she saw what was happening in Pennsylvania. And Pittsburgh survived. Many other communities didn't survive because they didn't change, and now we're witnessing what's happening in Detroit, largely based on people who don't know where Northfield is and where Southfield is and how many people left Detroit. It would be one thing if I didn't live in this nation. It would be another if I didn't understand some of the dynamics. I appreciate where you're coming from. I can't support it because I think if it were to become law, it would harm people. Not in Kentucky. Y'all
I understand.
all right.
I will say to you, though, that we are the only country in the world that, as a direct result of regulations, cannot open a new coal mine in America, simply because the technology is not available to meet the emission standard. And so we're the only country in the whole world you cannot do that.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the gentleman bringing his dialogue to this committee today, and I appreciate
That was monologue. That wasn't dialogue.
I appreciate the gentleman's monologue today, but the gentleman knows that, in fact, part of this experiment that we're doing is the opportunity to speak up, and your experiences and the things which you bring to this committee and to this House are deeply appreciated. Appreciate, gentlemen. Gentleman from Georgia is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I very much appreciate that. Mr. Whitfield, your team has been very generous with their time to work with me on an issue to not only have the analysis, but have the data on which the analysis is released as well. I think one of the tough things, no matter who's in the White House, no matter who's running the EPA, you can always manipulate that information for your own ends, and if we can't tell as the public, as Congress, what data went into making those decisions, tough to rebut some of those conclusions, and I appreciate your team working with me on my amendment. I wanted to ask Mr. Tonko about his amendment. I thought your presentation, Mr. Tonko, was very persuasive, thinking about these facilities that sit right there on the border. Is one state going to be derelict to the detriment of the state next door? As I read your amendment, I can't tell if there is any limiting language to just border facilities. It says any state may request that the administrator review any state's coal combustion residuals permit program for deficiency under this paragraph. Does that mean that California, for example, could request that Georgia's permit program be reviewed, or is there something that narrows the scope of who can exercise this interstate authority?
Yeah, I think in most given circumstances it would narrow it to those who are neighboring states.
And I think then about where the coal plants in the great state of Georgia are located. They need a lot of water to run those plants, tend to be located on rivers. Rivers tend to roam through other states. It's got to be 300 miles from the coal plant in my community down to the great state of Florida, but that river does flow that way. Is proximity an issue, or would that shared river basin qualify in your understanding?
Again, if there's a negative perceived or justified in this case, if there's an example that can come forth that shows someone's inaction or poor action is impounding upon them, then yeah, that would connect them in, I think, this given scenario. So I think it's important that there be a source as the EPA to go to speak to the fairness and justice of those people of that given affected state or region.
I thank the gentleman. Mr. Chairman, I yield back. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it, gentlemen. Gentleman from Florida is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The only thing I'd like to say is I have been somewhat disturbed by the negative comments about you and this committee and our Congress and the Republican majority about how it's a do-nothing, Congress, and that would make us a do-nothing member and a do-nothing chairman and a do-nothing committee. And I don't believe that. I certainly don't believe that heightens the opportunities for having some sort of bipartisan agreement on anything. If the only thing we can think of is how we can condemn the other side. I believe that the positive things that have come out of this committee have been good. And so I think it's out of respect to the country and getting our economy going. A lot of the things we've done have been, I think, exceptional. And so my one question to the two representatives of the bills that are before us is what's on the mind of most of the people in all of our communities. Does this help create jobs? So that's my question.
Thank you. Let me just say first that there's no regulations right now. So what we're trying to do is establish federal standards, state implementation of rules for fly ash confinement. So all the histrionics we're having, we have nothing now. We're going to have something, that, and to my friend from Florida, this was very close to passing the Senate at the end of the last Congress. So I'm not, I think it has a realistic chance. It's a stronger bill. But to speak to the question, 30% of fly ash is recycled. If you label that as a toxic emittant, that 30% will not be recycled. That's why the recycling sector is fully supported so they can continue to protect their jobs. That's really one of the major, and fly ash twice by the EPA in 1993 and 2000 both stated that coal ash does not have the characteristics of hazardous waste, including toxicity. So this is not us. This is the EPA saying it, and should not be regulated under Subtitle C. So we're protecting jobs, and we're also keeping additional fly ash out of landfills by using the recycling, and it'll lower the cost of, we're getting close to a highway bill. I can guarantee you the folks who are pouring concrete want to mix it with fly ash because it's lighter, cheaper, and stronger, and that helps it get more road, more bang for the buck. So that's the answer on my bill.
And I'm sure Mr. Rush would like to make a comment about 1582, and I would make this comment. This provides a second look at the apple so that we look at the regulation. It's analyzed by the Secretary of Energy, Secretary of Labor, others, FERC, to determine if it would contribute to higher energy costs and would it cause a loss of jobs. So those are two things that it looks at specifically. And I think generally speaking, we know if energy costs are increased, that overall makes us less competitive in the global marketplace. So I do believe that this legislation will help protect jobs as well as make us more competitive in the global marketplace, that decision would be made. And if this regulation is found to be detrimental to that, then they could stop the regulation.
In response to the gentleman, I would say first of all, as was put in one of the daily publications that really, there are emphasis on the Hill, here in the Capitol. There was an interesting article today that said something like, this Congress has passed 27 bills since the beginning of this term. And they were taking the Speaker of the House to task because of some of the comments that he made on national television. But I was astounded when I saw that we had passed only 27 years. I don't know, that's not a record that I'm proud of, and this is a record that I don't think the American people are proud of. As it relates to 1582, there's more than a second bite at the apple. You got the Department of Labor, they're going to get their bite at the apple. The Department of Energy is going to get its bite at the apple. Various other departments. So while we're jiggling around as each one of these separate agencies under this bill takes a bite at the apple, then we are in fact tying the hands of the engines, clogging the engines that may be, in the last resort, may be creating jobs. This delay that we're forcing upon EPA and these other kinds of onerous obligations and responsibilities that we're forcing upon the Department of Energy, you can't do anything but delay an outcome. And that's just as it relates to jobs. But even public safety, children's those in development. All of these issues are vital concern to us also. So I don't see, and I can't even imagine this bill ever emerging or ever getting to the President's desk. It failed, as was indicated, it's failed 4 times, and the 5th time is just right around the corner.
Well, Mr. Chairman, what I would tell you is I would again say that the number of bills you pass is not necessarily whether or not you're being effective or not. To me, in a lot of cases, we probably ought to be repealing bills, repealing things that have happened. We've tried our hand at that. Being here as a majority, bringing a balance to this administration, slowing down things that were comprehensive bills that happened during the 2 years before I got here, I think has been a good thing. Because we have slowed down things that probably shouldn't have happened. And we've brought a perspective to this Congress as Republicans that say, you know, there are things more to think about, just like these 2 gentlemen's bills, to say, hey, wait a minute. The things you're doing through these regulations hurt people. You may be trying to help people, you may have great intentions, but in the end you're hurting people. We can't afford to lose any jobs. And both of these bills try to stop those loss of jobs. There's no jobs that we can't afford to lose. And so I think we press on with what we're doing. These are 2 very good bills that send a message that say, hey, when we regulate, we may have good intentions, but on the other hand, there are consequences. And here's some consequences to think about. And I appreciate both of them bringing forward these bills.
Gentleman yields back his time. Let me respectfully agree with the gentleman. I've kept some focus, and there was something written about it in the last couple of days, but about the President in his State of the Union address setting a goal of 1 million new manufacturing jobs in America, and thus far, since that statement, we've lost net 16,000. And it primarily is due, if you look at those people who've lost the jobs, business leaders have said it was done because of Obamacare. And I think we've got a long way to come back. So, Mr. Rush, just one guy to another who knows you real well, when you figure out how we're going to get these 1 million jobs, maybe it's just naturally going to happen because everybody thinks that things are going to be so robust once this Obama health care bill gets done and we all reduce all the costs, and employers will now have a level playing field in the world economy. But if you figure out that's not going to happen, let me know and I'll work with you on that, because I sincerely, even though we're not flush with jobs in Texas, but we've got a bunch of them, I still want to work with you on it, and I don't want you to leave here today without getting some challenge from your good friend Pete Sessions saying I want to work with you. A gentlewoman from Florida is recognized. Gentlewoman does not seek time. Gentleman from Texas is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I know it's already been a long afternoon. I do want to thank other members of the Energy and Commerce Committee for being here today and presenting these thoughtful pieces of legislation. The President just the other day announced that he was going to pivot to jobs. I'm happy to report in our committee we haven't had to pivot to jobs. We've had to focus on jobs since Chairman Whitfield and Chairman Shimkus took over the gavels in January of 2011. I hope we'll continue that good work. And for the life of me, I don't see how it is a problem if after we pass a bill of however many 100 or 1,000 pages, and then 10 times the number of pages are written in the Federal Register, and proposed rules and guidance and final rules come out, that we shouldn't at least have one last say-so if it is going to cause $1 billion of effect. I think that's just common sense. I think Mr. and Mrs. America get that, and I'm anxious to see these 2 pieces of legislation come to the floor. And I appreciate the Chairman for having the hearing today, and we'll hear about the amendments, but I'm all in favor of us moving forward on this. Thank you, and I'll yield.
Gentleman yields back his time. For the 4 of you, I'm sure you recognize Dr. Burgess. He's made a strong showing on behalf of the Energy and Commerce Committee. We welcomed him with open arms, and he's done a great job but I know you felt like this was a home court advantage that you had because Mike was here. I trust you'll know that his service to this committee and yours is very important, and I know he's recognized as an important voice there, and I want to thank the gentleman for his service. I want to thank all four of you for taking time not only to be here but sharing your best ideas, and I look forward to a healthy and robust debate this week on your bill, and I want to thank each of you for being here. You're now dismissed. The next panel would now be called. The gentleman, Dr. Murphy, would be asked. The gentleman, Mr. Kildee, the gentlewoman, Ms. Schakowsky, I have seen. She is not outside. If Ms. Schakowsky does appear, she will be added to this panel. And I don't see other members who are seeking to be recognized at this time. Welcome to both of you. Mr. Kildee, welcome to the Rules Committee. Dr. Murphy, thank you for taking time to sit through this hearing. As each of you know, your testimony before this committee is very important. It helps us to prepare ourselves not just for the debate tomorrow, but to understand the positive attributes of public policy. And without objection, anything you have in writing will be entered into the record. Gentleman, Dr. Murphy, gentleman from Pennsylvania is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have two amendments, which are basically the same, but they are for H.R. 1582 and 2218. I'm hoping both members of Congress on both sides of the aisle will be able to support it. Last month, in a little noticed addendum to a rulemaking related to the efficiency of microwave ovens, the executive branch increased the benefits of avoiding climate change. Government environmental regulators have now decided that societal benefits from reducing a ton of carbon dioxide equals $36 a ton. What they did was change the formula until they got a number that they wanted. That number then impacts congressional cost analysis, impacts legislation, and kills jobs. Now, it's worthy of noting that there was no public comment, there was no vote in Congress, no formal rulemaking, no discussion in committee. This little edit, the so-called social cost of carbon, means big changes in our nation's energy policy and our economy. Now, I'm concerned that the agency can change a formula until it gets the answer they want, regardless of what's sound policy of science. Now, regardless of one's positions or belief or feelings regarding carbon or climate, we have to understand this legislative issue, this constitutional issue, that this unilateral change in policy runs counter to the constitutional authority of Congress. On July 9th, the Energy and Commerce Committee sent a letter to the Environmental Protection Agency asking for information about the impact of its regulations on jobs and the economy. The subcommittee that I chair on oversight and investigation wants to understand the data, the science, and ultimately the effect of major changes in policy on the country. There is an ongoing investigation, and the EPA owes Congress a thorough answer before invoking this action, but it will take an act of Congress to do so. My amendment places the social cost of carbon on hold while the committee conducts its review of the EPA's mathematical formulas and assumptions of the social cost of carbon. So let's freeze the social carbon rulemaking until Congress can carry out its proper oversight authority and determine what the true social cost is, because right now, the social cost has recently killed 380 utility workers in southwestern Pennsylvania who will be out of work this October at the Hatfields Ferry and Mitchell's power plants because of the cost of compliance with EPA regulations. Now, I might add that's after those two power plants had an investment of nearly $1 billion in the last few years to do work to clean them up. That social cost will be the tens of thousands of boilermakers, railroaders, miners, factory workers, operating engineers, pipe fitters, electricians, carpenters, and the list goes on, but all who will lose their jobs if the EPA is allowed to unilaterally and without the consent of Congress move forward in its actions. Now, I have a particular emotional attachment to this, Mr. Chairman, not only because it affects my district, but it affects a lot of places that I worked and volunteered in when I was in college. Many of us can remember Bobby Kennedy's walk through the broken Appalachian coal towns in the 1960s to illustrate the abject poverty that families and children were living in. I worked in those towns trying to help families hang on to some sort of semblance of hope in a hard-scrabble life. It was very tough, and too often it failed. Now, history is about to repeat itself. The EPA writes rules with no congressional oversight. Following that, the EPA takes action that leads to the closing of power plants and coal mines. First, jobs are lost by the tens of thousands, and then by the hundreds of thousands each year. So when people lose their job, we offer them unemployment compensation. They go hungry, we offer them food stamps. They lose unemployment, we give them welfare. They lose their homes, we give them public housing. They lose their dignity and they lose their pride. And, Mr. Chairman, the government has nothing left to offer. Nothing. When all these people really wanted was a job, and there's someone to pay attention to them, and someone give them the decency of sitting down and looking them in the eyes and giving them an answer. That is the social cost of the EPA. I'm determined to continue this investigation of my subcommittee in Energy and Commerce. And until that investigation is completed, I'm asking this amendment be adopted so the EPA cannot unilaterally and without the consent of Congress put in these regulations that they've made up, which will cost a lot of families their livelihood. And, Mr. Chairman, I would add their lives. Thank you.
Dr. Murphy, I appreciate you being here, and your words of your home state are true. They're also true for other states and other people and other members. And your same ideas about people who you represent is embodied well within this committee, and I thank you for being here. Mr. Kilday, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just for clarity, I'm here on Amendment Number 7, offered by myself and Mr. Connolly. I thank you and the ranking member for the opportunity to testify. I'd also like to give particular thanks to Mr. Connolly for his work on this. Our amendment would limit the U.S. Secretary of Energy's veto power over proposed EPA rules. As currently written, the Secretary of Energy would have unprecedented power to veto EPA rules. This type of veto power could be used to delay the EPA from establishing important rules that protect our natural resources and save the American taxpayers billions of dollars. We shouldn't be gutting the EPA's power to protect the health of American people and our environment. Ensuring a healthy public and protecting our environment from pollution should not be a political issue. Delaying or blocking proposed rules could result in polluters releasing even more pollutants into our environment, including smog, soot, carbon, and other toxic pollutants. Many of these toxins are linked directly to diseases like cancer, neurological impairment, and developmental disabilities in children. Additionally, 1.5 million jobs and over $62 billion in economic activity in Michigan, my home state, are dependent on precious freshwater lakes. With over 70 miles of shoreline, the economy of my district greatly relies on the Great Lakes and their fresh water. So we must ensure that the jobs dependent on that great natural resource are protected and that our water is safe for fishing, boating, and for drinking. In closing, and I am brief because I know the committee has been working a long time, the EPA currently utilizes an extensive review process for proposed rules, including public comments from citizens and interested parties, and a review by the relevant agency. Our amendment would simply ensure that any proposed rule relating to air or water quality would not be subject to unnecessary political interference. Thank you.
Thank you, gentlemen, for his comments today, and do recognize that the Great Lakes produce so many valuable attributes for not just the people of the region, but the people of the United States. And I appreciate you being here today. So is this your first time to the Rules Committee?
No, I was here before, but not as successfully as I would like to have been, but thank you very much.
I appreciate you being here. I thought I'd seen you before, and I recognize how important your service is.
Thank you.
I want to thank you for being here
I
today.
appreciate that.
A gentleman from Utah. Gentleman yields time. Gentleman from Massachusetts.
I appreciate both of you being here. I appreciate your presentations, and I have no questions.
The gentleman yields time. Gentleman from Oklahoma. Gentleman, the chairman.
If it's not him, it's me. So,
well, I'm not from Tennessee, but I'll always volunteer if that's what it takes. I appreciate you. Gentleman from Florida is recognized. Well, you've, as you know, you have a big fan of many people on this side over here, and so I would accept it as an opportunity to be with you, is the way I'd look at it. And I thank the gentleman. Gentleman, Georgia.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank you both for being here. Dr. Murphy, your amendment speaks near and dear to my heart. We have one of the largest coal-burning utilities in the nation in our part of the world, some of the lowest utility rates in the nation in our part of the world, and some of the fastest-growing manufacturing in the nation in our part of the world because of those low utility rates. Is there any indication that when folks are measuring the social cost of carbon, I always say I can't find a nation on the planet that has a good environmental protection program that doesn't also have a robust economy. You kind of have to have folks who can eat before you can focus on the rest. And I fear that when we drive these jobs overseas with expensive regulations like the one the EPA is trying to move forward, that China's going to burn that coal, and they're going to burn that coal a lot more irresponsibly than we're going to burn that coal. And so if we're measuring the cost of carbon globally, it's actually to our benefit to burn as much coal in America as we possibly can, because we know we'll burn it better than they will anywhere else on the planet. Is there any indication that the EPA's findings were based on something that goes beyond our borders, or did they even release what they based the new calculation on?
Thank you, sir. In understanding that our investigation is ongoing, we're trying to find out what this formula was. There used to be different formulas used, for example, by the Department of Transportation and by the EPA, and they had numbers all over the place. But the desire was to come up with a number that would force our hand when CBO does a cost analysis of impact of legislation. I might add this about China. Yes, we do export a lot of coal to China and other countries. Germany comes out of my district as well, India. And there are different levels of regulations. One example, I know a company near my district in Pittsburgh makes the stainless steel used in a scrubber. It has to be very hardy because it has to work pretty hard in that process. And they noted a very much thinner and less positive grade was used in China. When they had someone visiting a coal-fired power plant in China, they were puzzled how could they use such a cheaper grade of steel? It couldn't possibly survive when it's working, doing scrubbing. Well, they found out why. The only time they turn it on is when it's being inspected, and then they turn it back off. So it is a concern. And what that means is that they have cheaper manufacturing costs for energy, and they're able to knock people out of our jobs. I'd much rather have it here where our standards are very high.
Yeah, I appreciated the measured tone of your presentation. One of my great frustrations here in 2.5 years is it does often seem to be Republican Democrat or Republican House against a Democratic president, and I wonder where those times are where we're the Article I United States Congress trying to protect the people's power against a naturally growing Article II executive branch. It's been going on that way for 250 years. I suspect it'll go on that way for another 250 years. Folks have always feared the all-powerful executive, and why it is that we have been unable to find a way to express our disagreements here, but then adopt a House position, express our disagreements on the Hill, but then adopt a congressional position, and then hold that position against the executive, no matter which party he or she might be from. I fear we do a terrible disservice to our constituents on both sides of the aisle when the us against them is is Republican Democrat and not Article 1, Article 2. And I thank you for what you're trying to do to find a pathway forward. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Gentleman in Florida. Okay, gentleman from Texas recognized.
Well, Dr. Murphy, I want to thank you for bringing this thoughtful amendment to the committee. Thank you for spending so much time here with us today as we go through the process. Mr. Chairman, I think it's a valid amendment. I hope the committee can see to make it in order so we can have an appropriate debate and vote on the House floor. Now I'll yield back.
Appreciate the gentleman's comments. I want to thank both of you very much for not only taking your time to sit and watch what we've done today. I hope that it was worth your time also.
It's always thrilling to see democracy in action, Mr. Chairman.
Well, we're making sausage up here, too, so I appreciate it, and I hope both of you have an awesome day, and you're now excused.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Now would defer to the committee members for any presentation they would choose to make. Gentleman, Judge Hastings recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr.
Yes,
Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I ask unanimous consent that my statement in support of my amendment be put into the record, and I'm prepared to answer any questions.
Without objection.
All right. I have no further.
I appreciate it, gentlemen. I also recognize the gentleman from Georgia who's asked for recognition. Gentleman's recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's what all amendment number 1, as I mentioned briefly, it just asked that if we're going to conduct this cost-benefit analysis, that we release the data on which that was conducted. Again, no matter which side you're on, if you disagree with the decision that was made, you need access to that data to have an informed conversation about what went right and what went wrong. We know that data is available because it has been used in conducting the analysis. We just ask that it be made available to the public as well. I thank the chairman. I yield back.
Thank you very much. The chairman now sees no member seeking to be recognized. Excuse me just one, please. The hearing portion of H.R. 2218 and H.R. 1582 is now closed, and we are going to be in temporary recess for just a few minutes, and it would be my anticipation that in about 5 minutes we would be prepared to move forward. So, subject to call the chair, we're now in recess. Just a printer.
It's printing right now. Yes, sir.
Yeah, well, sometimes it's not.
I tell you what, yeah.
Committee to be in order. Thank you very much for allowing the opportunity for the printer to finish. Chairman now be in receive a motion.
Mr. Chairman, I move the committee grant H.R. 2218, the Coal Residuals Reuse and Management Act of 2013, under a structured rule. The rule provides 1 hour of general debate equally divided and controlled by the chair and ranking minority member of the Committee on Energy and Commerce. The rule waives all points of order against consideration of the bill. The rule provides that the amendment in the nature of substitute recommended by the Committee on Energy and Commerce, now printed in the bill, should be considered as original text for the purpose of amendment, shall be considered as read. The rule waives all points of orders against the amendment in the nature of a substitute. The rule makes in order only those further amendments printed in Part A of the Rule Committee report. Each such amendment may be offered only in the order printed in the report, may be offered only by a member designated in the report, shall be considered as read, shall be debatable for the time specified in the report, equally divided and controlled by the proponent and opponent. Shall not be subject to amendment, shall not be subject to demand for division of the question. The rule waives all points of orders against the amendment printed in Part A of the report. The rule provides one motion to recommit with or without instructions. The rule also provides for consideration of H.R. 1582, the Energy Consumer Relief Act of 2013, under a structured rule. The rule provides 1 hour of general debate equally divided and controlled by the chair and ranking minority member of the Committee of Energy and Commerce. The rule waives all points of order against consideration of the bill. The rule makes an order as original text for the purpose of amendment, an amendment in the nature of substitute consisting of the text of the Rules Committee print 113-19, and provides that it shall be considered as read. The rule waives all points of order against the amendment in the nature of substitute. The rule makes in order only those further amendments printed in Part B of the Rule Committee report. Each such amendment may be offered only in the order printed in the report, may be offered only by a member designated in the report, shall be considered as read, shall be debatable for the time specified in the report, equally divided and controlled by the proponent and opponent. Shall not be subject to amendment, shall not be subject to demand for division of the question. The rule waives all points of order against the amendments printed in Part B of the report. Finally, the rule provides one motion to recommit with or without instructions. You can give me a smaller one next time.
You know, we'll consider doing that. You've now heard the motion from the gentleman from Utah, and we're now open for amendments or discussion.
Mr. Chairman?
Gentleman is recognized.
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment to the rule. I move the committee grant H.R. 2218 and H.R. 1582 each an open rule so that the members have the opportunity to offer amendments to the bills on the floor.
Appreciate the gentleman's comments about an open rule. It seems like something I could have said myself. In fact, perhaps I have. I believe that what we've tried to do here is to effectively bring two straightforward bills to the floor, offer amendments. I noticed that the amendments that have been made, Mr. Conley, was Mr. Waxman, Mr. Tonko, Mr. Waxman, Mr. Hastings, Mr. Conley. And so I'm hoping that we have furthered the opportunity for amendments from major players in your party and from the committee. And I would offer a no vote on the amendment. There's further discussion. Those in favor of the Slaughter Amendment signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no. No votes have it. No votes.
Roll call.
Roll call.
Ms. Fox? Mr. Bishop? No. Mr. Bishop? No. Mr. Cole? No. Mr. Cole? No. Mr. Woodall? No. Mr. Woodall? No. Mr. Nugent? No. Mr. Nugent? No. Mr. Webster? No. Mr. Webster? No. Ms. Ross-Leitonen?
No.
Ms. Ross-Leitonen? No. Mr. Burgess? Mr. Burgess? No. Ms. Slaughter?
Aye.
Ms. Slaughter? Aye. Mr. McGovern?
Aye.
Mr. McGovern? Aye. Mr. Hastings? Mr. Hastings? Aye. Mr. Polis?
Aye.
Mr. Polis? Aye. Mr. Chairman?
No.
Mr. Chairman? No. Clerk report. 4 yeas, 8 nays.
Amendment's not agreed to. Further discussion or amendment seen none. The votes now on the motion made by the gentleman from Utah. Those in favor signify by saying aye. Those opposed, no.
No.
The ayes have it. The ayes have it.
Roll call.
Roll call.
Ms. Fox. Mr. Bishop. Mr. Bishop. Aye. Mr. Cole. Mr. Cole. Aye. Mr. Woodall. Mr. Woodall. Aye. Mr. Nugent. Aye. Mr. Nugent. Aye. Mr. Webster. Mr. Webster. Aye. Ms. Ross-Leitonen. Aye. Ms. Ross-Leitonen. Aye. Mr. Burgess. Mr. Burgess. Aye. Ms. Slaughter.
No.
Ms. Slaughter. No. Mr. McGovern.
No.
Mr. McGovern. No. Mr. Hastings. Mr. Hastings. No. Mr. Polis. No. Mr. Polis. No. Mr. Chairman.
Aye.
Mr. Chairman. Aye.
Clerk will report.
8 yeas, 4 nays.
Amendment is agreed, motion is agreed to, and the gentleman from Texas, Dr. Burgess, will be managing this rule for the Republicans,
And Mr. Hastings for the.
and Judge Hastings, as previously warned, will be in charge for present that for the Democrats. I do not anticipate at this time that we will have any further need for the committee this week. I could be wrong. I've been perhaps wrong before.
No.
No. Not that I remember, but
Yeah.
Louise, the good part is you'll be here to remind me. But I'm very hopeful that if we have any
That's
Senate
my
action
role
on
in
any of our,
life, yeah.
you know what? You're awesome. You're awesome. I want to thank the committee for their hard work that they've done today. In great respect to the people who come to visit our committee, when they come up and see that we take seriously our jobs and appreciate their hard work, I think it says volumes about what this committee stands for, and I thank you very, very much. Here's now ended.